good morning. First of all, sorry if it sounds like I'm whispering. It is 4 AM here in New Zealand and I've got kids sleeping in the next room, so don't really want to wake them up. So, as a primer for what I'm doing this morning, I'm going to whip up a couple of demo objects and I'll walk through what you're seeing as we're doing it. So basically we're working with custom objects, and one thing I want to show really quickly before we start is what happens when an object has more than 4 properties on it. So I'll just go through and quickly whip one up. And I need one more property. Yeah. That'll do. So what we should find, if I display this object, given that it's got 5 properties, PowerShell is going to display it as a list. We can select only a couple of properties out of it. In fact, we can select up to 4 properties, and PowerShell is going to display it as a table by default. Now unfortunately I don't have a lab set up here to demo it, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, unless one just came to me. Probably isn't the best example because it's showing a table with more than 4 properties, but as you can see, this command is set up to show a table by default. But if you run commands out of the AD module, the Active Directory module, you'll often find, say if you look for users, you'll get their display name, their SAM account name. Morning, Andrew. And certain other properties off the bat. And if you want more, you would have to go and tell PowerShell that you want to see more. So you can actually do that. You can actually do that on your own custom properties, and I found that I was doing that a lot. Oops. And so I figure I should probably just turn it into a module. So as an example of seeing this in the past, this is a very old VMware script that I've got sitting around. And if we scroll down, there's this block of text here that I seem to have in a lot of my scripts, which you'll see DefaultPropertySetter, and I've listed a couple of parameters. And then there's some .NET business going on to actually apply that eventually down the end of the script here just before it gets output. We've got our standard members being applied to my result object. So to see something like this in action, if I just lift this as is, and grab that bottom bit, this default property set is where we're telling PowerShell what we want to see output from our object by default. So in this case I want name and say the date is the only two. No, let's do time as well. So now if I run all of this and have a look at my demo object again, you'll notice instead of the list, no, the IC, I forget. See, last time PowerShell opted to display it as a list because it had more than 4 properties. This time, applying that standard members to it, which included our set of 3 properties, it's now just outputting those 3 properties. But that other info is still there if we need it. We just have to tell PowerShell that we're after it. So, as you can see in this script, and in probably quite a lot of my other scripts, I've got this, and I've got this. And I copy and paste that everywhere. So, what I've started working on is a module to not only set them and doing it in a uniform way, but also getting the property set, resetting it back to nothing, and if I can figure it out, also undoing it. But that could be interesting. Andrew, for some reason I'm still in the habit of actually running my code in the ISE, but writing it in Visual Studio Code. I should probably start getting out of that habit, but yeah, we'll get there. So I started working on this a week ago on a live stream. That one was a pretty short live stream because my wife was watching Stranger Things and it was Guy Fawkes night, so it was pretty loud in the background. So I think it is time to actually start working on this. So where I got to last time is I've got a function set up. It takes in two parameters, an object, which could be an array of objects, and it also takes those objects from the pipeline. Just thinking about, well, actually, sorry, there's 3 parameters there. So I'm just trying to think of all the different ways that I could use this. Obviously, the display set, because we need to be able to tell it what parameters we want to see, what properties we want to see. And through testing, I found out that we need a force, a force switch sitting in there. So, because it can take values from the pipeline, I've got it set up with a begin, process, and end block. There's nothing actually in the end block. But in the begin block, we're setting up those first 3 lines where we tell it our display set and set up the standard member that we're later going to apply to our object. So that block there is exactly the same as what I had up here, and funnily enough, that was in my begin block there as well. as a why am I doing that? This isn't going to change regardless of whether I'm giving it an array of objects or I'm piping in a list of objects or whatever. So when I'm pulling things in from the pipeline, every item that comes in via the pipeline is going to be run through this process block. This begin block runs once. So since there's no reason for this to be run more than once, I just need it sitting there and being ready to use. I'm not going to run it. I'm not going to have it in the process block to be run every single time. So coming down to the meat of the process block, because we can pass in an array, I've got a for each loop there. And one thing I found is that if we've already got a member set or the standard members applied to an object, PowerShell is going to complain if we try doing it again. So to show that, and this is an example of a really good error message from PowerShell, because it's telling me exactly what the problem was. I've tried adding a member with the name PS standard members, which is there, but it's already got one on there, and if I want to override it, I need to use the force parameter. So if I do that here, we'll see that it just goes through fine. But obviously I need a way of exposing that through my function. So I've got a force switch there, and if the user specifies the force, yeah, I could have done that. So if the user specifies the force switch, it's going to just go ahead and apply it to that add member command. If they don't, what I was wrestling with on the last live stream is how I want to show that exception to the user. And now that I'm talking this through again, this so while that's a really good error message, I don't really want to show it coming from add member. So let's just go into showing how this function actually looks in action. Sorry, I'm using Synergy to link off to a laptop, but it's very grabbing. It's grabbing my mouse very early on the left-hand side there, and it's not being very helpful. Now this is my home desktop, and I'm using my laptop as a third monitor. So we need to give those different names. So now we should have three objects. If we go ahead and grab this, and yes, I'm doing this the super lazy way. I'm just going to paste in the function. But if we now go demo object 1, And I've already forgot what I called it. Default property set. So we're going to pipe in one object into set default property set, which is a mouthful, and I'm going to ask for name, time, date, and country. Yeah, it's more of a... I noticed something I was doing over and over again, and copying and pasting code all through different scripts. I thought it's probably about time I actually just pull that out and yeah, chuck it in a module so that I can use it everywhere, and if it's helpful to anyone else, then good. So as you can see, given demo object 1, a default property set, and it's outputting now. Well, it outputs right away, and I forgot that it does that. It outputs the object directly, and I don't think I actually want it to do that. Because if I'm running this as part of a script, chances are I want to have control over the object itself being displayed or passed on to the next part of the script. So, but if I have a look at that demo object again, you can see showing those four properties that I asked for. And if I look at one of the other two, it's showing all 5, and PowerShell is showing it to me as a list. For those other two, let's get them on the same line, in the same state, and let's have a look at doing it via the pipeline. I'm giving it 2 objects, and we get both of them out again. Cool. While I think about it, I'm going to get rid of that, because I don't want them displayed. So now let's see what it looks like when an error is thrown and I haven't used the force command there. So, got all 3 of our demo objects, and I've decided I don't care about the country. Now I just think I tweaked on what I wanted to do. So my problem last time oh, sure thing, Andrew. Actually, what I'll do is I've got a script here that I've using as my donor, which is a script for well, it's vCenter using PowerShell called, let's make this a bit bigger so it shows well on the stream, get semi-usable disk info. And in here, this script ends up outputting a PS custom object, but it's showing, it ends up with quite a lot of data, and yeah, so I'm adding, and most of the time when I'm running this script, I don't really care about half of the properties that I'm storing inside this object. So the actual so what you're doing with your object, with your objects when you want to show the property sets is you're setting up, it's called a standard member, but at the end of the day, basically you're telling PowerShell this is the default property set for this object. So the 3 lines I've always used to set this up, let's see if I can get them all on one line. No. So forgive me because this is going to look horrible, but for the sake of being able to see it on the screen, there's a backtick there. And this should all be one line, those 2 there. So basically, you tell PowerShell, this is the list of properties that I want, and you'll see these match up with, and sorry for scrolling fast, but they match up with the property names that are in my object. Now specifically, these are the ones that I want PowerShell to show me when I display this object. Then you set up a PowerShell object with that list of strings as an argument of that new object, and then you create member info, a member info object with that previous object as its argument. So then you have that sitting there ready to use. This object here is what you end up needing to actually apply to your objects. And we do that all the way at the end. So we've got our PS custom object here, and this was when I was creating my objects slightly differently from the looks of it. But regardless, we've got our results object. Come down here, we're adding a new property to it. But at the very end, we add that member set with that object that we created up above, and then we output it. And that's effectively the same thing as what we're doing here, except we don't care in this function. We don't care about creating the object, we're just taking an object in as an argument and then applying our display set, which is brought in here, and you'll see those same 3 lines here in our begin block as what we had in that other script. Now one thing like I said, I was wrestling with how to show this message to the end user, and the default behavior was to so the default behavior was that it would show one error message and then stop executing. And at the time I thought, no, that's not how I want things to roll. I still want it to apply to the objects it can. But now, in comparing that error message to a stream of error messages, I'm actually thinking we should just have one. What I wanted to do here was somehow identify the specific object. You'll notice I've got a little placeholder there, but I wanted to identify the specific object that I couldn't set the default property on. And I don't think I'm actually able to do that. So what I'll actually do is, instead of continue, which tells it to just jump to the next item in the for each loop, I'll change that to break, which should stop everything from running. And we'll say we could not set the default property set on one more object. And it's telling the user that a default property set already exists, and to use the force parameter. So if we take all that again and overwrite it in the ISE, if we go back to trying to do this with our demo objects, So what's happening here is something I hadn't thought about. So even though we're showing break here, when you pipe in your objects, it's not actually piping in. It's sort of roundabout logic, but it's not piping in one array or one list of objects. It's piping in 3 objects, and each of those 3 objects, it's executing this process block in its totality. So even though I've got break here, it's going to run through 3 times. Show the difference. If I grab those 3 and actually put them on this end against the object parameter, you'll see we get 1 error message. And now I'm having to go back on my thinking because I want it to be consistent. So if this is showing an error message for every object, then I want this to show an error for every object, but that's a simple fix of just putting that back to continue. So the difference being between continue and break, if I didn't cover it fully before, continue will just, not that it really matters here because it's at the end of the for each loop anyway, but it will jump basically to the next object in this for each loop. Break, on the other hand, just crashes out of the for each loop in totality and moves on with the rest of the script. Now I guess we should try, before going any further, running force and seeing if that actually works. And it does. So if we look at our objects again, let's grab all 3 here. Let's get twitchy. Now, just to reiterate, PowerShell is showing us those 3 properties there, but the rest of them are still sitting there behind the scenes. So if you run select star, or specifically select country and PC, or whatever else, the data's still there. It's just that we've asked PowerShell not to show it by default. Really handy for those scripts where, and I've been working on a really good example at work, but I don't think I'm allowed to show it. But say you've got a script where you're collecting a bunch of data from all of your servers. You're getting information about all of that server's disks. That's the disk's utilization, the free space, any error messages, basically doing an entire inventory of that server. But when you're running it, you don't want to see a list of 20 parameters for every server, and you might have hundreds of servers. That's going to be next to useless in your console when you output that, assuming you're actually looking at it in your console. So doing this would be a good way of showing say, for example, the server's name, the date that the script executed, and whether or not it's responding to a ping. And then you can quickly scroll up through the list, see a false in there, and run and check why that server is different than the rest of them, or whatever else needs to happen. So now I think, other than some comment-based help, I think this is done. This function anyway. There's one more test case that I wanted to try out, which was actually making this an array and passing it in via the pipeline. And we're getting our error message because we're not using the force parameter, which is good. And just so that we can see things have changed, let's change time to country. I hadn't realised all this time that this was giving me... Oh, right, PowerShell's just decided to show it differently, alright. So let's just commit those two changes, because all we've done is commit those, push that up, and I will grab the link to that and drop it in chat in case anyone wants to check it out. Although I think it's also in the description, but you can never be too sure. So, GitHub. See what everyone's up to today. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, a couple of years ago, I used to stream a lot on a website called Live Coding TV. Which, recently, it ended up changing its name to Live Edu TV, and it's got all monetized and yeah, it was a good community on there, but the direction the website was taking, I just couldn't get behind. And I found the last couple of months I've been really itching to start streaming again, so I figured, hell, why not? So, I think if I can at least get some comment-based help on this done, and these two should be fairly quick. We might be able to get this done in an hour, possibly. I might be being over-optimistic. Yeah, I'm being over-optimistic because that comment-based help is going to take a while. Right, what I'll do is we'll start working on the other functions. I'll work on the comment-based help on my own time, and then I think on the next stream I'll end up going through uploading this to the PowerShell gallery, because that's always fun. So the first thing I need to figure out, if we're doing a get. Now if you're wondering These are probably a bit hard to see up there, but those comments that I've got at the top of my scripts at the moment was basically I went off to the list of PowerShell approved verbs, and basically those are the when it wants to show me something. Oh, thank you, Google. They're basically the comments here, and if you've never been to this website, I use it all the time when figuring out the specific verb I actually want for something. So, for example, there was, well, simple things like the difference between find and get. And I think they've specifically mentioned something up here. No, find and search. Get versus read. But they always have pretty decent comments in here, like I'll find, say for example, I've got a script that's replicating a virtual disk from one data store to another. So I've got that keyword of replicate sitting on the sitting on my mind, and I'm going, what verb should I use? Can I use replicate? I come in here, search replicate, and PowerShell basically tells me you should use copy. So I tend to go, alright, I'm not really copying it, but I'll use it anyway. So anyway, where I was going with that is, you'll see get, and it's matched with set, and in here I've got a get, it's matched with set. I've also got reset and I think undo are matched up, but regardless, I took the definitions from that website, because ones like undo set the resource to its previous state. It's pretty clear, but it also gives me a prompt for what I want to be doing in that function. Same with reset, sets it back to its original state. And even though I know what set and get do, I chuck them up there as well as a primer. So that was a little bit of a weird tangent, but let's get on to where I was going, is how easy is it to actually get the default property set from an object. So let's have a look at one of our objects. And to be completely upfront, I've never done this before, so we're both learning. We're all learning together. Now, jumping out at me right away, we've got our member set called PS Standard Members, and I have a feeling that member set, PS Standard Members, so I'm going to assume that this is what we're after. Default property set, and we've got referenced property names. Value. Right, let's have a look in each of those and see what we have. Yep. Right. Cool. So that there looking in PS standard members, default property set, reference property names, it gives us an array, or at least a list of the parameter names we've supplied, which means this this function should be pretty simple to get off the ground. And we're doing get excuse me, muted just in time. Now what we need to think about here, in this example, I'm allowing the input of an array of objects. And the question is, do I want to be doing that here? I know at a minimum we at least want... and one thing I was thinking of before is I don't actually want by property name in there, simply because there's not really anything else I can think of in PowerShell that's actually like, that's what I'm going there is that's never actually going to come into effect, so why have it? Let me quickly commit that. So, regardless, I know I want an object. And obviously the question is, do I want... Well, I guess it becomes a moot point, because if I allow values from the pipeline, a user is going to be able to specify what they believe to be a list or an array. So I might as well just embrace it so that it's uniform. Yeah. Not really using any of the command-like functions, but we'll chuck that in. Oh, actually, yes I am, because I'm using pipeline input. So in this case, I don't think, unlike our previous function, I don't think we're actually going to end up with anything in the begin block. So let's start on here. So for each object in object, which just rolls off the tongue, we could just go directly to pulling this information off and literally doing nothing else with it. Just making a note for myself to remember to put some help there. Right. Well, I guess we might as well just run this and see what happens. So on demo object 1, let's get your default property set. And we have name, date, country, as we'd expect. If we do all of them, well, it's doing what we ask it to do. It's not very user friendly. But I'm not sure of a better way to actually show this. And just to test all the use cases, let's make this an actual array. And as an aside, in PowerShell I'm using the term array and list interchangeably, just as a habit. Interesting. How many times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So why is it doing that? So here we passed in 3 objects here, we got 3 sets of output there. Now here we ended up getting output 9 times, and I wonder if it's because I've left that as an array when it doesn't need to be. Although why that would have an effect, no. Let's have a look back here. Ah, so it's because I was performing this on all objects, whereas I actually only wanted to do it on that specific one in the array. And the reason why we didn't see that behavior. Yeah. The reason why we didn't see that behavior when we were piping it in is because instead of this full, basically when you pipe something in, actually, I am confused as to why it didn't happen here. Because in theory, that should be treated the same way as this. Or at least this. Oh well, I've learnt something new today. So I would assume if we grab this now, shouldn't see much change in the output except that it actually behaves how we expect it to on those last couple of tests. So that one there, we get 3 lots of output, 3 lots of output, and we go straight to that one, 3 lots of output. Awesome. The question is that how we want the output? Because I'm not sure how else we would identify. Well, we go back to the problem I was having with the exception message in that I don't know the name of the variable that's holding that object, if that makes any sense. So if I look in here again, yes, we could do. I'm just wondering what else we would put. To identify, because we could just make it a single property custom object, which I guess works. Because we could just have it come out like that. Yeah, let's do that. So we can make this pretty simply and just output it directly. By I guess we can call it exactly what we call it in here, which is a display set. Let's give that a whirl and see what happens. Yeah, that's a bit better. It means jumping through a little bit of a hoop to use the data, but I think that's a small price to pay for having that be a bit more easily viewed. It's certainly more legible than that was. You can imagine it being a lot harder to read if you had a lot more objects. I guess for completeness sake, we should probably test the other test cases as well. Yep. Perfect. And if we only do 2, cool. Now, one thing we do need to test is if we go back and recreate those objects and then run this, good. So while I was building that there, I was wondering if we haven't set a display set, will I end up with an error or will I end up with an empty array? Luckily I've ended up with an empty array, so it makes error handling a little bit easier. And that I'm not actually sure if we need any, because worst case scenario, that just ends up being a blank array. So cool. That was always going to be an easy one to do, wasn't it? So now we need to reset. So the question here is, are we able to remove a member, or do we pass in an empty string via the set default property set if we're looking at reset? So I guess it's time to do a little bit of experimentation. Let's all the way back up to here, where we're forcing a new default property set. Let's confirm that it's applied, and it has. So, can we so if that's add member, is there a remove member? Now, add member, get member. Take that as a no. Can we let's grab that again. Pop it down the bottom here. And you. So, just to confirm, demo object 1 currently has a property set applied to it. If we go in here and do, let's explicitly say null and see if we get an error. So if we give it null, what happens? So, two things, it can't be null, and we need to force it on there. So let's try that, and let's try forcing it. Valid. This is interesting. Ah, of course. So what I've just noticed there is the reference property names does actually have methods on it, meaning I can clear it out in theory. Because hopefully because it's a collection there, so in theory, yeah. Let's just go in there and try. Clear. I did get an error message. and we can see that it's now empty. Now that means there's an interesting possibility here. Sorry, we're going on a little bit of a tangent while I think about this. So at the moment, demo object 1, no property set, showing all 5 properties, and it's displaying as a list because it's got more than 4 properties. If we go and set a property set, default property set of name and country, although interestingly I've cleared it, it's still saying it's there, as in the member's there, which means I need to force it on. Anyway, so now if we look at demo object, we've got those 2 properties, PowerShell showing it as a table because it's got less than, well, 4 or less properties. Now what we just saw there, that clear, means we can technically go in here and go, oh bugger, I forgot that I really want to see PC, and we can add it to the reference property names. So instead of completely resetting the default property set, we can on the fly add something in. Or in theory selectively remove something. I no longer care about country. So that means all of a sudden we can add a couple of more functions in there. We can do add, and this is going to become a mouthful, property set. Yeah, I'll do it. Property. Add default property set property. I might change these names. So we go add, we can go remove, and I'm just including those there as reminders to do that at another point in time. The remove one is like that, and the add one, very similar, add. Cool. But back to what we were actually doing, is resetting. So we had clear, didn't we? Where are we? Sorry. So this is going to end up being very similar to this function. So I'm just going to grab that, dump that in there, blank line at the bottom, blank line at the bottom. Cool. And before we go any further, might as well do a commit. Very descriptive. You can go too. Cool, that's all up on GitHub. Excellent. So we can close that off, just make some more room for ourselves. Right. This time we don't need to output anything. This is reset. Still need our objects. Still need that. This time, at what point are we clearing? So we've got default property set, reference property names, and I'm pretty sure it's there that we call clear. Reference property names, yes. Only if I'm accepting, so I only have these begin, process and end blocks if I'm working with pipeline input. And I know because of how I'm going to use these functions personally that I'm going to end up needing pipeline input. I believe if you don't include the begin block, I think you can get away without the end block, but I think if you get rid of the begin block, it doesn't pick up the process block as being for processing your pipeline input, if I remember correctly. Because the begin's not there above it, it picks it up as a command. Well, it tries running it instead of the process block. It tries running, I believe, the get process commandlet, which is really not what we want. So having the begin there means it knows what to do with the process. So, I don't think there's much else needed for this. The more I think about the issue, the issues with, say this, where I can't really identify the object that this display set belongs to. In order to do an undo, which is, rather than reverting it back to nothing, is reverting it back to the previous state. In order to do that, I need to know what the previous state is, and I don't have a decent way of storing that reliably, which means the end result is the user should just be rerunning set if they want to change it to the previous state. So I'm just going to make the call now and get rid of undo. And let's test this one. Let's go back to a point where we've got demo object 1, demo object 2, and demo object 3, and we're forcing them to have that. Now let's clear, no, not clear, it's reset. Actually, since we were literally just on there, what does this say about clear? Clear is removes all the resources from a container, but does not delete the container. What's the difference between clear and unset? Not unset, reset. Sets a resource back to its original state. Removes all the resources. No, I'm going to stick with reset, I think. So, reset, default display set, default property set. And if we look at those again, cool. So just to show that one more time, force it. I'm actually beginning to wonder if that should just be implied. So, anyway, we've got our objects. We've got a default property set on them, showing name and country only. We've decided, no, we want to see everything again by default, so we'll pass them through reset default property set. This time, let's try it the other way, make sure that works as well. And if we look at those objects again, we're seeing all 5 properties. So that, to me, looks like it's working. How are we doing for time? 5:15. Yeah. So, we've got set default property set, get default property set, and reset. And those to me all look like they're working, which is a good start. Just weighing up how much longer I think this stream can go for. Let's try and at least get these other two, the add property set member and remove property set, or remove property set property. Let's try and get those ones done and see how we're doing for time then. These ones are going to be very similar. Probably more similar to the reset one. So, might as well just use that as a base. This time we're going to need to know which property we're after. One thing that I need to think about is it possible to add multiple at once? So let's have a look at demo object 1, you're seeing 2. If we go standard members, that. So we can add a string or add an object. Let's try adding an array. No. So let's try adding that as an explicit array. It worked. Well, at least it didn't error. No, so let's edit it as that. But that, sorry, what I was looking at there is, can I add multiple properties at a time? Because that might be handy as a user to be able to do that, but thinking it through, I don't think it matters. Because what we can do in here is this is going to be a string. It's mandatory. But then not only can we do a for each for the object, we can do a for each property. Remember to act on object and property this time, but I'm sure we will. This one is add prop. And I just realized how quickly these two functions going to end up being done, because there's really not a lot to them. Because if I'm not mistaken, that's done. Go back to setting our demo objects. Look at demo object 1 again, 2 properties. Now if we take demo object 1 and add, well, first let's add 1 property to it. Let's do, heck, I've forgotten what it's called, PC. Add PC, let's put it back to what we had. Confirm that it's back to 2, alright. Sorry, going through all the history there. So let's this time add PC and time. Awesome. So what happened there is technically it looped through all the objects. There was 1. And then it also looped through every property and added that to the display set. And in theory, this is going to work exactly the same way backwards. So if we look at remove, we need the same properties going in. Parameters going in. the loop looks exactly the same, except this is remove. Ooh, that's a really good idea, Andrew. Let me, if I even have it installed, put this over here before I show anything work related. But let's start making notes of things to add in the future, because I think that would be a really good topic for a whole live stream in and of itself. Yeah, as you can see, I use it quite a lot. And that, yeah, actually it's still thinking. I think there's a few more sections than that. Right, if I jump into, actually let's just create a new section. I don't normally use the Windows 10 version of this though, so forgive me if I fumble my way around it, because it's different enough from the desktop app that yeah. So Andrew on mentioned, basically, yes, I'm looking forward to it as well. Dynamically generate available. I'm going to leave it at that because this could potentially be used on a few of them. Because yes, that would be really cool, and I think it might even have been Trevor Sullivan. He's done a fair amount of work on those dynamic property sets, so that'd be pretty good to tie in. Anyway, we've got remove. Did I actually test remove? No, I didn't. No. Actually, I guess one thing I need to do is try this on multiple objects before we call it done. Next time I need to remember to get out a keyboard that doesn't have broken keys. So we're adding 2 properties to 3 objects. That looks like it's worked. If we look at all of them. Cool. Now, that means we've got 3 objects sitting there that we can try the remove function on. So we've got name, country, PC and time. Let's say I don't care about country or time anymore. I need to suppress that, because I don't really want to see the output from it. But, perfect. So, we want to get rid of the output. My personal preference for doing that is assigning it to null. The other alternative in PowerShell is piping to out null. The difference being a couple of milliseconds between that and out null or redirecting to null. For me, I've always done it this way. It's one of the faster ways, and it's not very readable, in my opinion, but I know what it means, so yeah. I guess though, since we have made a change, we should retest that and make sure that it still works. So let's go ahead and yes, it does. So let's put those back, grab our, let's do this the lazy way. I'll try and do it the lazy way, and then PowerShell disagrees. Two properties, going to add some back in. Yes. Now let's remove them again. This time, let's get rid of name and PC. Mix it up a bit. Cool. So the difference this time being, we didn't get the output saying true for everything it got rid of. So if I'm not mistaken, I think we've got code in every one of these. I honestly wasn't expecting to get through them that quickly. And also this shouldn't be module version 1, this should be module version 0.1. Okay, so been going for about an hour and a half there, and I think this is a natural place to wrap up for the morning. So I will commit all these changes. What I'll do between streams, probably on my lunch break today, is I'll write up some comment-based help, and at the start of my next stream, I think we'll work, Andrew, on that, the dynamic generation of the property list, and then push this up to the PowerShell gallery. So yeah, I'll be announcing these streams on Twitter at least 12 hours, probably more, before I go live. And I assume, I don't know how this works from from the live streamer side of things on YouTube, but I'm assuming if you subscribe you'll get a notification as well. Yeah, so I look forward to the next one. Enjoy the rest of the day or evening or whatever it is in your part of the world. I'll let this song finish and end the stream there. See you later.